It is 7:50 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. Let's start our bulletin with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
The Lebanese government has reported over 2,255 deaths and about 10,524 injuries. In South Lebanon, 17 people were killed and 62 others were wounded. Strikes in Nabatiya resulted in 3 deaths and 41 injuries. In addition, in El Beqa region, 1 person was killed and 22 were injured, while in Baalbek, 5 people lost their lives and 19 others were wounded. Smoke rose from Beirut's southern suburbs as the Israeli hostilities continued. Over the past 24 hours, 57 airstrikes have been recorded, bringing the total number of Israeli assaults since the start of the aggression to 9,588, according to a statement released by the Lebanese Government Emergency Committee. The National Dialogue Conference, titled Defending Lebanon, has kicked off under the invitation of the Lebanese Forces Party. The conference, uniting opposition leaders and national figures, seeks to create a political framework to end Israel's war on Lebanon through cooperation with Arab nations and the international community. It follows an opposition-led initiative to restore state control, separate Lebanon from regional conflicts, and enforce an immediate ceasefire. Lebanese Defense Minister Maurice Salim has declared that Lebanon does not seek war but will not accept continued Israeli assaults. He emphasized the urgent need for the international community to pressure Israel into implementing UN Resolution 1701 and halting its aggression against Lebanon. Salim also condemned the recent attacks on UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, describing them as further proof of Israel's ongoing occupation and hostility. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baqir Qalibaf has met with Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati in Beirut. Following his meeting with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, Qalibaf held a press conference. He later visited the Iranian embassy in Beirut, where he engaged in discussions with Lebanese MPs and party leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned the recent targeting of the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon by the Israeli occupation forces. During a summit with leaders of 9 European Union member states in the Mediterranean, Macron said that it is totally unacceptable to see UNIFIL troops deliberately targeted by the Israeli occupation forces. Macron added that he condemns it, does not tolerate it, and will not tolerate it happening again.
Tout à fait inacceptable de voir les troupes de la FINUL visées délibérément par les forces armées israéliennes. Nous le condamnons, nous ne le tolérons pas.
U.S. envoy to Lebanon Amos Hochstein has emphasized that the United States had not given the green light for any military operations in Lebanon. He further noted that the U.S. is committed to strengthening the Lebanese army's capabilities in the south. Hochstein added that President Joe Biden has been working hard to achieve a ceasefire during the UN General Assembly session. Hochstein stressed the need to fully implement UN Resolution 1701 to resolve the conflicts,
including through an immediate ceasefire and hostage release deal. And he's asked me to come back to Lebanon ahead of the renewed talks this week.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has strongly condemned the recent targeting of the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. Meloni said that the attack was unacceptable asserting that it violated UN Resolution 1701. In a joint statement, France, Italy and Spain expressed outrage over the assault on the peacekeepers at UNIFIL's main base in Naqoura.
1701 delle Nazioni Unite, il governo italiano, come sapete, ha...
Cyprus President Nikos Christodoulides has called for an immediate ceasefire in both Gaza and Lebanon at the Med-9 meeting of European leaders. The leaders met in an attempt to devise ways of de-escalating the Middle East conflict, which is threatening to engulf Lebanon and trigger a wider humanitarian crisis.
Την πλήρη και άμεση εφαρμογή του ψηφίσματος 2735 του Συμβουλίου Ασφαλείας για απελευθέρωση όλων των ομήρων.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has also joined European leaders in condemning Israel for firing on a UN peacekeeper watchtower in Lebanon. Sanchez described the incident as totally unacceptable and urged other governments to follow Spain's example and stop arms sales to Israel. Spain stopped sending arms to Israel during the early days of the Israeli offensive on Gaza.
Y exigimos el alto el cese de todo tipo de violencia que por desgracia están sufriendo.
UN organizations and some other countries have sent support and supplies to Lebanon following the continuous attacks launched by Israel. The United Nations said that around $426 million are required urgently for Lebanon, while the international community has so far contributed with less than 15% of this amount. Qatar and France sent aid through military aircraft, while 2 Turkish naval frigates sent 300 metric tons of supplies to Lebanon. Beirut Farmers Market is still open despite ongoing conflict. The vendors report that their capacity is at half the usual level because many are in war zones or unable to access their production. A chef at a makeshift kitchen stated that they used to prepare 1,500 meals for those in need, such as the displaced. However, following the onset of Israel's occupation offensive, that number has increased to 4,500 meals. NGO World Central Kitchen has intensified its relief efforts as Israel continues its offensive in Lebanon. Volunteers in Beirut are distributing approximately 50,000 meals daily across Lebanon. However, with around 1.5 million people displaced, additional assistance is urgently needed. Will still uphold their humanity. Amid the violence and aggression, animal rights activists are courageously risking their lives to rescue pets and other animals harmed by Israeli airstrikes. In less than 3 weeks, nearly 190 cats and dogs have been rescued from areas in Beirut and its suburbs affected by these airstrikes. Now we move to the latest developments in Gaza. At least 42,175 people have been killed and over 98,000 others injured in Israel's occupation attacks on Gaza since last October. Israeli occupation forces committed 5 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, resulting in the killing of at least 49 Palestinians and the injury of 219 others, according to medical reports. The Israeli occupation forces have renewed their orders for Palestinians in northern Gaza to leave their homes and shelters. Israel's military spokesman Avichai Adrai told people to leave parts of Gaza's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood and other areas in and around Jabalia. In a post on X, Adrai asked people to head south to Mawasi, a packed area in southern Gaza designed by the military as a humanitarian zone. The Palestinian Civil Defense has reported that residents of Jabalia camp have been deprived of water and food for 7 consecutive days amid the ongoing Israeli aggression in northern Gaza, which includes the demolition of residential blocks. The Civil Defense confirmed that over 200,000 Palestinians in Jabalia face imminent death from Israeli bombardment or starvation and dehydration due to the ongoing land blockade. It also reported that the occupation forces have denied medical teams and rescue personnel access to vital fuel and supplies, worsening the dire conditions for trapped civilians. Israeli forces have intensified airstrikes on Jabalia in northern Gaza, resulting in 22 Palestinian deaths, numerous injuries, and exacerbating the humanitarian crisis.
For the 7th consecutive day, Israeli occupation forces have intensified their bombardment of Jabalia in northern Gaza, resulting in additional casualties. In the past 24 hours, at least 22 Palestinians have been killed, dozens injured, and several reported missing due to Israeli airstrikes on a densely populated neighborhood in Jabalia, which have also destroyed 4 homes. Earlier, Israeli occupation forces ordered residents of Jabalia, al-Nazla, and northern Gaza City to evacuate their homes immediately towards the southern Gaza Strip. This evacuation order impacted hundreds of thousands, many of whom had already been displaced from the Jabalia refugee camp and nearby towns during the military incursion over the past week. The humanitarian situation in Jabalia is deteriorating rapidly, with food, medical supplies, and water blocked from entering Gaza. Additionally, 3 more fatalities were reported from a targeted strike on the Al-Kahlout family in the Al-Tufah neighborhood of Gaza City. Over the last 24 hours, Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip have claimed at least 49 deaths and left 219 others wounded. The total Palestinian death toll since October 7th has now reached 42,175, with an additional 98,336 individuals injured.
The Palestinian media reported that Israeli occupation forces have demolished residential buildings west of the Palestinian side of Rafah in southern Gaza. Israeli airstrikes also targeted Al-Mawasi area in the Palestinian side of Rafah, alongside intense artillery shelling on the eastern part of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Migration, Badr Abdel Ati, has emphasized the necessity of Palestinian unity and strengthening the role of the Palestinian National Authority to meet the aspirations of the Palestinian people. During a meeting with a delegation from the Palestinian Fatah movement, led by Mahmoud Al-Alloul, the deputy chairman of the movement, Abdel Ati reiterated Egypt's rejection of plans to displace Palestinians and attempts to separate the West Bank from Gaza. He highlighted Egypt's efforts in international communications to ensure the delivery of humanitarian and relief aid to Gaza amid the obstacles imposed by the occupation. And for more analysis, we now move to Mark in our newsroom. To you, Mark.
Thank you, Hera. So for more on this situation in Gaza, we're joined by Ahmed Al-Bashtawi, Professor of Political Science. Welcome to QNews, Mr. Bashtawi. I'd like to start by asking, what do you think are the objectives that Israel has to achieve by continuing this conflict in Gaza?
Good evening to you and to everyone. The goals that Israel wants are long-term goals. It's a strategy based on displacing the largest amount of Palestinian people to try again and build settlements in Gaza Strip. These are the real goals stated by Netanyahu, which is the release of hostage and destruction of Hamas military infrastructure, because what we see in the reality is not destruction of Hamas, but a destruction of the infrastructure of the Palestinian people in Gaza Strip as in south of Lebanon.
And what is the current humanitarian situation for civilians and the citizens of Gaza?
Of course, Israel is deliberately committing the policies or implementing the policies of starvation that they have started for a year now. They refuse any humanitarian truce and they refuse any release of hostages deal. They believe that the military pressure is the best thing that makes the Palestinian resistance make concessions. So the best thing is to create a gap between the resistance and the people and make the life of the Palestinian people difficult to hate the resistance. This is done by besieging Gaza Strip and the starvation of the Palestinians in Gaza and prohibiting access to food and medication in Gaza. This is not a military issue. The goal here is to besieging the Palestinian people to achieve the Israeli goals of practicing pressure against the resistance, and to achieve these long-term goals are making the life of people in Gaza difficult.
And what are the challenges faced by humanitarian organizations who are operating in the region?
The challenges are that Israel do not allow the free movement, not for the international organizations, and we even saw the attack against Guterres by Israel. They considered him an unwelcome figure in Israel. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the United Nations said that all the ministers in Israel are attacking the United Nations and its institutions. Yesterday, we have seen how Israel took the premises of UNRWA in Jerusalem. We saw how they attacked the UNIFIL troops in Lebanon. So their operations are not abided by any international law. That's why the organizations are suffering and having a hard time in delivering all the aids deserved by the Palestinian people. They also face another challenge, which is the rejection of Israel to allow the United Nations to move. And all these statements of UN employees are revolving around the real danger against the Palestinian people and on the necessity of the entry of supplies, even by the United Nations, which is the best way to guarantee that these aids go to the Palestinian people only. However, Israel still refuses the entry of any aid from any entity in top of them, the United Nations.
And Professor Bashtawi, with Israel's ongoing violations of international law, of course we have the atrocities in Gaza, now Lebanon as well. Is there a way perhaps that international law could be strengthened to protect civilians in conflict zones like Gaza?
Of course, this is the responsibility of the major states and the permanent members of the Security Council. They have to activate the resolutions of UN Security Council against Israel, because Israel is not above the law, is not an outlaw. It's a UN member state that has to apply all the resolutions. Another thing that there should be real stances in this regard. A whole year in which the permanent members in the Security Council failed to issue a resolution that obliges Israel to cease fire. So these countries have to take their responsibilities seriously. They have also to make a decision and implement this decision as well. The whole world says that the war should stop, the fire should stop, but one state, supported by the United States of America, they refuse what the whole world says. They continue the genocide against the Palestinian people. So it's time, after a whole year of a massacre, the major states, the European Union, Russia, China, all of them should take real stances by enacting laws that protect the Palestinian people. This is the bare minimum the United Nations has to support the people by delivery of aids to the civilians.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the bulletin. That was Ahmed El-Bashtawi, who is a professor of political science. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's back to you, Hala.
Thank you very much, Mark. Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman al-Safadi has urged the United Nations Security Council to lift Israel's immunity and immediately ban arms sales to the country. Safadi emphasized the need to compel Israel to comply with international law and to end all its illegal wars to prevent dragging the region into an all-out regional conflict. He noted that the occupation will not cease its crimes unless Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his extremist ministers are held accountable. According to the United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF, a new round of polio vaccinations in the Gaza Strip is set to begin on October 14th. The second round of polio vaccination will start on October 14th, aiming to vaccinate around 590,000 children under the age of 10. This follows what the WHO reported was a great success in the first round of the vaccination effort in Gaza, which concluded in mid-September and vaccinated around 560,000 children under the age of 10. United Nations officials have voiced concerns that an Israeli offensive and the evacuation orders in northern Gaza might affect the second phase of its polio vaccination campaign set to start next week. In Gaza's north, the Israeli occupation forces have been pursuing an offensive in recent days, sending its troops into Jabalia, the largest of Gaza's 8 historic refugee camps, as well as the nearby towns of Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. 3 attempts by the UN Health Agency and partners to assist and evacuate patients from northern Gaza hospitals have been thwarted this week.
For accommodation outside some polygons to reach the children.
And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we have been covering. Smoke rises from Beirut's southern suburbs as the Israeli hostilities continue. French President Emmanuel Macron condemns the recent targeting of the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon by the Israeli occupation forces. And the Israeli occupation forces renew their orders for Palestinians in northern Gaza to leave their homes and shelters. And this concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNews.eg to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.